Heidi, welcome to the Siobhan Lou Show. I'm so excited for this deep conversation.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah, it's going to be good. I met you through Tom. So Tom went to you, and he's obviously happy for me to talk about this. Would you say it was like therapy sessions or it was like EMDR? What would you say it was?
Pretty much just EMDR. And then we had a few sessions before that to sort of prepare for the EMDR. Because whenever I start working with someone that's just coming to me for EMDR, I always have to do a few sessions before to just kind of find out lay of the land, like what's your background, what's your trauma, what's your sort of life timeline of important events, so that when we're doing the EMDR, nothing sort of surprises me and jumps sort of out that I wasn't prepared for. So we saw each other for mainly EMDR, I think was the ultimate focus. And then a few sessions around that to support the EMDR.
Yeah, and that he always like raves about how one session like changed his whole life. For people that don't know what it is, could you maybe just explain a little bit about what EMDR is?
Yeah. So whenever I approach it with a client that I've had and been seeing, I always feel better about it because I'm like, they know me and they know I'm not crazy. Because whenever I explain it to someone who doesn't know me, I feel like I sound nuts. I feel like the concept of it is so batshit crazy that it makes no logical sense. And so when you try to explain it, I feel like I just have to be like, you just got to trust me. Okay. Cause like, I swear it's good, but it just sounds really weird and makes no sense. So it's a mouthful. It stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing.
Wow.
And this woman in California, in Berkeley, Francine Shapiro, discovered it in the late 80s and basically found that there was this weird sort of thing that happened when the eyes moved left and right and sort of darted. She found that it was easier to kind of think about painful memories because almost in a way, I guess, like your eyes are sort of distracted. And so she got kind of curious about them because she was a psychologist and a researcher. She was like, this is kind of weird. So I'm going to sort of get it more formalized and start researching it with Vietnam veterans and other war veterans and other people who've experienced trauma that she had in her environment, I guess. And what she ended up finding was that that's exactly right. That when you move the eyes back and forth, and not even so much as moving the eyes, because you can also trigger the same thing by, this is called like the butterfly hug, which if I do EMDR via Zoom, that's how we do it via Zoom, tapping on the knees. But basically you're getting both sides of the brain stimulated. So when you get the right and the left brain both kind of going bing, bong, bing, bong, bing, and sort of turning on in little micro bursts, it's easier for the brain to think about something traumatic because I'm kind of distracted. So I don't fully go in it. So the reason why it's so powerful for trauma is because when trauma memories are laid down, it gets kind of stuck in the amygdala. And the amygdala is where fight flight response comes from, memory, fear, all of the painful stuff that happens to us gets sort of stuck in the amygdala. And it's really primal. The amygdala is like the lizard part of the brain. The cortex, however, which is the top part of the brain, the last part of the brain to evolve and the most evolved part of our brain, it's kind of what makes us more human than monkey because our cortex is more evolved. The cortex is responsible for all the good stuff, understanding, like logic, reasoning, consequence, forward planning, making sense of things, right? But when you experience trauma, it gets stuck in the amygdala in that real primal space. The cortex can't access it as much as we want it to. When we're traumatized by something, and why does it get stuck there? Because if your amygdala's whole like purpose is to keep you safe, that's why we have it. That's what its whole like focus is to keep you safe. It needs to remember the bad stuff. It's so much more important. I don't need to remember the good stuff because how does that serve me, right? That's what the amygdala thinks, right? It makes way more sense for me to remember that on that day when I crossed that river, I was wearing pink and the mountain lion attacked me and there was orange berries on that bush. So now my brain goes orange, pink, not good, right? So that's why. And then that keeps me safe, right? Then I can't get hurt again in the future. What I want though is cortex to be able to come in and go, whoa, Heidi, it was one day. It was out when you were in the middle of mountain lion country. So just because you wear pink or just because you see orange berries doesn't mean that those, whenever you see those colors, you're going to die. But that's the thing with trauma is it doesn't make sense. It doesn't play fair. It's not logical. We all know that if we've experienced a once-off trauma, that it was a once-off and the likelihood of that happening again and again is low. But brain doesn't care. Amygdala is just like, dude, it happened once. We need to make sure this never happens again. So EMDR, I say, is like the bridge. So we move the files that are stuck in the amygdala of, oh my God, it happened. It's going to happen again. And we move it into cortex where it's safer. Cortex gets it. Cortex is like, dude, it happened. It sucked. But like, we're fine now. Like, look around, we're in a safe room. That's where we want the memories and the files to sit. And by doing this back and forth eye movement, and this is actually how I move my fingers. For those of you that are just listening, I just put my fingers up like 2 fingers together, like, what is it in Hunger Games where she does?
Oh, yeah. I get it. If you've not seen Hunger Games, watch it and then watch the show.
Same gesture.
Yeah.
It's like peace sign, but then you put your fingers together.
Yeah.
And I just go left, right, left, right. So I sit sort of like this, and then the other person sits sort of diagonal from me. And I just go like this. And they just watch my fingers go left, right, left, right. And we do about 30-second bursts. And in that process, you're sort of trying to pay attention to watch my fingers. So when I say then when we start sort of the session of going back to the memory of, let's say, the car accident. So I might say a starter sentence that's like, so let's just go back to the day of the car accident and just let your brain go wherever it wants to go. If you want to think about your 5th birthday, cool. If you want to think about the day before or the morning of, wherever your brain wants to go, let's just let it go. And that is sort of a like subtle push to your brain of like, this is where I want to go, but I'm also giving you freedom and flexibility to go wherever you want to go. So you don't feel sort of afraid and stuck. Then I start doing the fingers, and then your brain goes. And then in that process, the files move. And again, I know it sounds batshit crazy, but it desensitizes basically the amygdala, because I don't need to feel afraid because I'm sitting opposite Heidi watching her crazy fingers. And then, so it's like, I can see those memories. And then as we sort of work through it, because I'm in this safe environment, I then lay them down differently. So then I remember that traumatic memory differently in this safe space. And a huge part of this is allowing the body to do what it wants to do and what I couldn't do when the trauma occurred.
Wow.
So oftentimes with people that are, say, being assaulted or attacked, that might look like wanting to do physical movements of pushing away, blocking the face, running. So sometimes when we're doing EMDR and we get to say the part of the story where the person is, being pinned or something, their legs will start just involuntarily. Their legs will start like they'll running in place, like their knees will start bouncing. Wow. And I'll notice that and I'll say, do you want to run? Let's run. And then we'll both do it together. So I don't want them to feel weird. So I do it with them and we sort of run and, like sit in place. Sometimes they'll want to throw punches and I'll say, let's do it. Let's jump up. And so we'll jump up and they might throw punches, scream into pillows, grip. A lot of times I'm scanning bodies, looking at fists. And oftentimes when we get to like the scary part of the story, their fists will just involuntarily clench, jaws will clench and breathing will slow, all those things. So yeah, that's a very long EMDR sort of summary. Yeah,
that's amazing. Because I knew what it was a little bit from Tom explaining it, but I remember he said he was punching a pillow, like he just wanted to get, and the trauma that actually came up for him was something that he never thought traumatized him.
Yeah.
Which was so incredible. He's like, had no idea. And this is why he said that one session just changed his whole life, changed that memory. He's like, I had no idea that was traumatizing. So I'm assuming when the brain goes into that, it's trying to, find something that actually was traumatizing, but you might not be aware of that traumatized you at the time. So that's just, it's so incredible. And it's probably worth doing a session to maybe find something to be like, okay, this is affecting my life right here, right now, day to day.
Yeah. So, well, where's a really great place to start is where you got some of your stories. So all of us would have top 2-3 stories. That's the stories we tell ourselves I'm not enough. I'm not in control. I'm stupid. I'm useless. The world is unsafe. I can't trust my judgment. We have these core beliefs, and in EMDR, we call them positive and negative cognitions.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we start, I give a person the list, and it says positive and negative cognitions, and anyone can Google it. If you just Google positive, negative cognitions, EMDR, you can see the standard kind of list that we all use. And it's basically just a list of stories that we all tell ourselves. And they're just short sentences, like, I can't trust myself. I'm unsafe. I didn't try hard enough. So like, say if I was attacked and I couldn't get away, I didn't try hard enough to get away or whatever. Right. So, and then the positive cognition, I did the best I could, or I'm working towards being healthy, or I can make safe choices or whatever. That's then what you want to leave with. So what I say to people is, which one of those negative cognitions feels the strongest? And that's where we start, because then when you identify which one is the strongest for you, which say is, I can't trust people. And then you want to leave with, I can learn to trust people, or I can trust people. I then will say, and what's the memory associated with that story? Where'd you learn that? You learned that somewhere. You didn't come out thinking that. So either you had a negative experience with someone, or multiple negative experiences, but you have a memory that goes with that story. So what's the memory? And then you might say, being betrayed or whatever. And then I want to find, give me the worst bit. So I'm looking for the 10 out of 10 distress. When I think about that memory, what is the most distressing when I think about it just for a second in my mind? So my heart rate elevates, my breathing goes faster. I feel like I want to just get away from this memory. So that could be in the car accident, when the car started to roll, when I saw my friend's head hit the windshield. So whatever the worst bit. And the other cool thing about EMDR is you don't have to talk much, which for those of us who've experienced trauma, nobody wants to talk about their trauma, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Saying the words, or like recounting the experience, like, nobody wants to do that. Join the club. So the cool thing about EMDR is you don't have to say much, which is how I can often kind of coax people into it who are severely traumatized, who have complex PTSD. I'll say, dude, you don't even have to tell me what the image is that goes with that. If you want to just say blue, because that was the color of the wall in the room that you were assaulted, that's fine. I don't need to know all of the details. Like, dude, I don't even need to know who the perpetrator was. I don't need to know any of that. And that's what's so cool about EMDR, is that you can dramatically shift a person's relationship with the worst thing that's ever happened to them in like an hour and a half or 2 hours. So to bring so much relief and reframing of something so powerful in such a short amount of time. EMDR is like, it's a no-brainer for me. If I ever meet anyone who has anything like nightmares, phobias, I've done it a lot for fear of flying, driving, vomit, needles, any kind of phobia. It's just great because you basically just reframe that file of a fear thing, something I should be afraid of, and you put it into, it's okay. And it's not that you shift it into like, oh, the day I was assaulted was a great day. No. You take the distress out of it. So I can think about it and go, oh, that was a really hard moment. That was very painful. That was very hard. But when I think about it, my heart rate's down, my breathing is normal, and it feels, this is what everyone always says, the memory feels very fuzzy and very far away. Like I can't really see it as much. It's not so vivid. And that is so cool because like with nightmares, literally what it feels like is we turn them off. Like I've had so many clients who've had childhood abuse or a specific assault in childhood and have had nightmares every single night since. And the first night that they don't have a nightmare is the night that we've done EMDR. And then it continues. Like it's crazy. It's crazy. It's absolutely
so
not
powerful. So powerful. I mean, just like that one session knowing, I mean, it would change your whole life. So when we're talking about trauma, for people listening. And this is something that I used to get hypnotherapy. And when I went into my first session, she was like, oh, so you've experienced this type of trauma. And I was like, what? Like, I would never call it trauma, like being betrayed or cheated on. I'm like, what? Like, how is that a trauma? And she did. She discussed the brain and what the brain's doing and trying to protect me, especially new relationships and meeting other people and trust issues. But I would never say I was traumatized. So when you speak about trauma, can you talk about like the different types, from like even something so little and small that maybe most people would experience, to kind of working way up to the bigger traumas that maybe you deal with or have met with clients?
Yeah. So great question, and such a common one, because since I'm a trauma specialist, I see everything through the trauma lens. So when I talk to if I talk to someone at a dinner party, if I talk to someone at work, my brain is always just like,
Yeah.
and where's the trauma there? Like that's just the lens that I see the world, right? So it's hard. And then if you talk to someone who like specializes in CBT or, some other kind of methodology with psychology, they're going to see them through a different lens. So this is my lens, and this is what I see everyone. My favorite definition of trauma comes from Peter Levine, and Peter Levine is one of the gurus in trauma land. If any of you are trauma survivors or trauma clinicians and you haven't read Peter Levine's work, highly recommend it. It's very comforting, validating, and insightful and educational. So Peter says, the best definition of trauma is any experience where I feel profoundly helpless or lose my ability to cope. You look at life through that lens, you go, oh, well then, yeah, I've had trauma, because I've had moments where I was profoundly helpless, say my mom getting cancer, getting fired or let go or made redundant from a job, pregnancy, right? I'm losing control of my body. I feel helpless in what's happening to my body. Like, there are so many things that people don't realize the brain can perceive, your amygdala can perceive as I'm helpless in this situation, and or can lose my ability to cope, which is why we can see a group of 20 people be in the same plane crash or bus accident or whatever, and you have 3 of them that like go on to become, motivational speakers and are like fine about the whole thing, and then you have like 17 of them that are like deeply traumatized and, rocking in the corner. And it's because everyone's perception is different. And so if you perceive it as I'm helpless and I can't do anything, and I'm not able to cope, then the brain lays it down sort of as trauma. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So much sense. And that's what was kind of explained to me as well, like in terms of what's, again, it's just what's happening with the brain. But I guess when people, I'm just talking about when people turn up to breath work and the breath shows them certain experiences that they've gone through, and they're like, I didn't realize how much that affected me, how that affects my triggers, my everyday life. And the breath kind of shows them like, this was an experience you should maybe, kind of look at. And in terms of EMDR, does that show people how to integrate it during the session? Or is it just the change is just the integration in the brain in terms from like, crossing over that bridge?
Yeah. Well, so 2 things. So one, the power of what breathwork does and why I'm a fan of breathwork and EMDR for trauma is because trauma is stored in the body, right? So we know that the amygdala locks in the memories and stuff like, and the orange berries and the pink shirt. But where trauma really lies is in the body. And that's where it manifests. So when you're doing a body practice like yoga, running, breath work, you are messing with basically all of those little trauma memories that are stored. And when you do something like yoga, breath work, or running, or any sort of physical stuff, you will be releasing, like opening up these little vaults, these little files you're opening up. And breathwork is so great because anyone can do it. Like, it's for all abilities, right? You don't
Absolutely.
Does it quadriplegic? Like, doesn't matter what kind of abilities you have, anyone can do breathwork. And when you tap into the nervous system, because that's where it's all stored, like frozen and just constricted, right? When you are releasing stuff in the nervous system, which the breath is so great at doing, and you start to sort of create a sense of safety in the body, that's when you are then able to start release the memory and then integrate, because in that moment of doing breath work with you or, wherever the person is, it's a safe environment and I'm safe there. As I'm thinking about this unsafe memory, hang on, brain is then like forced to pick, well, what am I, safe or unsafe? And then it's like, no, I'm safe now. I was unsafe then, but I'm safe now. So then it sort of melds the two together and gives it like the new label, like it paints over it, like painting over wallpaper, paints over it and goes, no, we're safe. Yeah. So did that answer all of your question? What was the rest of the question? It was
just about like integration, because I like comparing it, like I know breath work kind of says like this is maybe what we're dealing with today, but this is how I'd love you to integrate it. Is that the same as EMDR? Like, is there like a message or a realization or anything that comes through that was like, okay, this is how we're going to move forward, basically?
Yes. Yeah, totally. Wow. And it's a relaying of the memory. So we're rewriting kind of the story so a lot of times what I'll do in EMDR is we'll do a fantasy set where we'll come up with what would have made me feel safe, powerful, and in control in that situation. And so some people will say, Superman's with me, my parents are with me, I become a giant, I all of a sudden have a gun, whatever. But whatever I wanted to have done in that moment, I couldn't do because I was a child, because I went into the freeze response and I just was completely frozen, whatever. And when you come up with this new story, this is what's so cool about the brain is it buys it.
Yeah.
And even though Superman was not there, it's like, but now when I think about that memory, I feel stronger and I feel more empowered because Superman was there. And it's like, you can see people's faces as we go through, say, doing 10 sets of the fantasy session, the fantasy, in like the fantasy storyline, that then they're like, this is so weird that like now when I think back to my assault or the car accident or the bushfire or whatever, it just doesn't feel as like stingy and it doesn't feel as powerful because we ran it a few times with that new narrative and that I'm in control and I'm in charge of this. And it's so cool because it's like when you have a cut on your arm, you don't sit there and tell your skin to heal. You don't look at the cut and go white blood cells, go skin. You don't think anything about it. It just does what it does, right? And EMDR, I feel like, is the same, that it just allows the brain to heal itself and taps into the like innate knowing, the innate wisdom that we have to heal ourselves by just letting it do what it wants to do. And so it just rewrites the memory into the safe box and then it's safe. And you're not really doing anything. You're just letting your brain kind of go. And I say to people all the time, just watch my fingers. That's all you have to do. You don't have to do anything. Your brain knows what to do the rest.
Yeah.
Super cool is one of the ways that it will often do that is it will start to resource memories, true memories, not Fantasyland, true memories where it supports the truth that we're aiming for. So if it's people are trustworthy or I am safe, just on its own, without me saying anything, it will start providing memories from when you were little, when you were in high school, of goodness and trust and safety. It is mind blowing to watch the brain resource memories that provide comfort to the person. So it's the healing the cut, but in the brain's own magical way. And I always say, when people say to me afterwards, like, thank you so much, it's changed my life and whatever, I'm always like, dude, it's such a privilege to bear witness.
Yes, same.
It literally feels like you would know that with breathwork. Yeah.
Absolutely.
You really feel like you are watching, like in a time lapse, like watching a cut heal and watching the tissue all grow back together and then the scab and then the scar. It's like you feel like it's just like an hour of watching rapid healing. It's such a privilege. It's so cool.
I totally agree. Like I got goosebumps when you were saying it because it's just my favorite thing to just watch people heal. And I get the same, it's like, thank you. Like, you've changed my whole life in one session. I'm like, no, it's like, you're doing the work. You're there. I'm there to like hold the space and, just
Totally.
witness what's going on. And it's like that quote, it's like, you are your own healer. We're there with the tools and the space, and
Totally.
they're doing the work, which I think is so special. Like, if you know that you're healing yourself, that gives you so much more power as well. It's like, I don't need anyone. I'm not relying on anyone. Like, my body and my brain in this moment is healing itself. So it's just, this is why I love spreading these, like, there's so many different tools. And for me, another one was hypnosis. And how you said, like, just, the brain is doing it like by itself. So just leave it to do it. And I think it maybe took me like 10 sessions of hypnosis to really kind of, I guess, just let the brain do its job. And I was like, I wonder if I'm going to notice or what's going to happen. But eventually the memory or the trigger, or it just was gone. Like, it was gone. And I'm like, what happened? What did my brain do? Like, what happened? It was crazy. Just like from sitting in hypnosis and just letting the brain change and do its work. And then just one day it was gone. It was crazy.
It's crazy. And that's why I think I'm such a big believer of EMDR, and why I love it so much is because, dude, we're talking like an hour and a half to 2 hours. That's crazy. That's crazy. That's nuts.
I know.
When I think about trauma clients I've had in the past, especially those with like significant trauma, childhood sexual abuse, like ongoing for years, or war veterans and like the horrific stuff, or torture stuff that they've seen, cult ritual abuse survivors, complex trauma, and seeing, in a 2-hour EMDR session, significant shifting where those memories don't distress me as much. Or a big one I would say, though, is probably the stopping of nightmares, flashbacks, and just the ability to sleep and get sound sleep when I've had, flashbacks and nightmares of those horrific events clouding my dreams for decades. Like, that's just crazy. Or the phobia one, I think too, is a cool one, because you can test that. It's so easily tested to see the power of EMDR, that you can do EMDR over a driving phobia, and then at the end of it, get in the car and go drive, or go get on a plane, or go get a blood test. Like, it's so, like, it works, where it's not like up for debate. It's like, well, dude, you couldn't drive for 7 years and then you have EMDR and then you could drive. Like, that's crazy,
Yeah.
But I was going to say too, with the traumas, with the big T and the little T traumas. So I can't remember who first brought that term out, but there's this kind of belief that there's this little T and big T trauma, that a little T trauma would be when I'm stranded on the side of the road in the rain or something like that. And then the big T trauma is like, rape or assault or childhood abuse or fire, whatever. And I get it when people use those terms, but I prefer to say it's all the same size T trauma, because it's all perception and it's all relative, right?
Yeah.
Like, I haven't been to war and I haven't experienced torture for decades and been a POW. So like, I have, that's not on my spectrum of like how bad my trauma is. I know my trauma, right? And I know the stuff that I've been through. And so what is my trauma, and my worst of the worst, that end of the spectrum could be the mild end for the dude who survived torture in war, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's all, I have big T and little T traumas in my own life, right? That I categorize. But I think what often happens is, like what you just said, is people don't recognize or validate their own trauma, and don't realize that the little T trauma I experienced is sufficient, or like gives me a ticket into therapy. People will always say to me like, oh, wow, you're a trauma therapist. Like, you must hear some crazy stuff. And I'm like, yeah, but trauma is such a spectrum that it's not just like for big stuff. Like, there's lots of little stuff that I think is highly traumatizing, but people don't often give themselves that validation, that the breakup or the relational trauma of my friends don't want to be friends with me anymore, or I didn't get invited to so-and-so's wedding. Like, that can be highly traumatizing for people.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, like again, I can totally resonate with that because I'm like, oh, growing up, everyone gets cheated on. Like it's just a thing that like guys do. Sorry for the guys listening that don't, but whatever. That was like my thought process. And I'm
Yeah.
like, no way. And then when she said it, it actually just made this whole weight just drop from my body because I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Like this is why my brain does this. This is why certain things trigger me because it's trauma. And then I could start to research trauma and what's going on with my body. And I could be like awareness, I guess, just awareness of me as a human. So the most common thing people say to me about therapy when they go, they're like, I don't know what I would say. Like, what would I go in and say to someone, even though they have trauma? Like, is that a common thing that people, what do you say to those people? Because I think it's so good to like, I'm like, I would just go in and talk. Like for me, it's really easy. But what would you say to those people that are listening? They're like, I have no idea what I would say to her.
Well, and even people who have significant childhood trauma, they often will say to me, like, I don't want to be here because I don't want it. Why would I open that can of worms?
Yeah.
Like, I'm 55. My life has been fine. I open it now, like that just sounds stupid. And then I'm like, has it been fine though?
Yeah.
Really? Has it been fine? And what does that, how do you know? How can you compare? You've never lived two lives to know what it's like if I talk about my trauma and not talking about my trauma. It's only after you've done one or the other that you have a.
So true.
So when people say the whole, I don't know what I would talk about. The first thing I say is you got to be really specific on your therapist that trauma is not one size fits all. I was talking to my GP about this actually the other day because we were talking about EMDR, and she said that one of her patients came to her and she was like, how are you going with the psychologist that you're working with? And the woman said, whatever. And then my GP said, have you thought about doing EMDR? And she went back to her psychologist, went back to the GP, and she reported back, my psychologist doesn't know what that is and has never heard of it. And I was like, alarm bells. Like, if you have a clinician that you are seeing for trauma and they do not know EMDR, fine if they're not qualified in it, because you can see people for EMDR.
Of course.
But if they don't know what it is, that is horrifying to me, because that says to me, you are not a trauma-informed clinician.
Yeah.
Because anyone who is a trauma-informed clinician knows that EMDR is like peas and carrots, peanut butter and jelly. It just goes together. Trauma and EMDR just go hand in hand. And all of the gurus, all of the trauma experts, Peter Levine, Bessel van der Kolk, Pat Ogden, all of the gurus will say EMDR is like standard protocol, like, CASAs, the Center Against Sexual Assault in Australia. If you are sexually assaulted and you go to a CASA, one of your standard, I think they do maybe 10 or 12 sessions. One of your, or maybe even two of your sessions will be EMDR. So they now have it as a part of like the protocol.
Yeah.
And that I think says a lot that a government funded organization has EMDR as part of the standard, set is indicative of the power of it, that, cause it takes forever to get the government on board for mental health stuff. Yep. Right. So, anyway, so what are you going to talk about in therapy? So first of all, you need to find a clinician that's trauma informed.
Yeah.
Second thing, finding a clinician is not one size fits all. I always say finding a therapist is like finding a life partner. You don't marry the first one you date. You might have to date a few till you find the one you want to marry.
Yeah.
And it sucks that you might have to shop around and go to a few clinicians. But what people will often say to me is like, oh, is this what therapy is like supposed to be like? And I'm like, yeah. This is good therapy. This is what good therapy looks like, which is where we have a relationship where we like each other. We get along really well. It's really easy and effortless to talk to each other. You don't feel judged by me. I don't tell you what to do. And the way I always explain it is like, you want to pick a therapist that you feel like you could go have a coffee with or a beer with.
Yes.
Feel like you click with them and they get you. That's the dream. If the person you're seeing you don't have that with, find someone else, because we know from research too that the biggest factor of impact for change, of what is the magic of therapy or what helps people change, is the relationship. Number 1 is
100%.
what all the research shows. It's not the smart shit that they say. It's the relationship. It's the human, it's the having the human connection. So if you don't click with your therapist, dude, find someone else. And then the trauma thing is vital. You need to find someone who's trauma informed. But then as far as what am I talking about? The thing is, when you're traumatized from something, you don't even realize, you can't even see it. And this is what's so tricky about it. You don't even see the ways that it's impacting you. You cannot even, it's a blind spot. You don't even recognize that. So say from that trauma, the story I'm telling myself is men can't be trusted, or the world is unsafe. That is impacting you it's like micro. It's all these little ways that it is impacting your daily life, choices, conversations, relationships, jobs, living environments on a micro daily level. So even though you come to therapy to process your trauma, quote unquote, you might come in and I say, how was your week? And you say, oh, Tuesday, I was at the grocery store and this guy stole my parking spot. And I'm starting to go, and I'm starting to put together these little formulations in my head about how that relates back to your trauma. But you're like, this has nothing to do with my trauma. This is about the dude in the parking lot. So it's little everyday boring life stuff that trickles back down to childhood and trauma, and where the birthplace of all of these stories kind of came from.
Yeah, I love that. That is like such a perfect way of explaining it. Like just everyday tiny little things. And you're like, oh, and I guess like EMDR breath work brings your awareness to, all these tiny little things. And for me, I guess for most people, majority of it does come from like your inner child and your childhood and how you were, brought up, and those stories and values that were kind of placed on you as children. So I guess for me, for doing breath work, so much healing was healing like that little girl inside all the time. And every single breath work session I do, everything's always, like you said, like an invitation, and it's up to them if they want to go into it or not. But I always say, if you feel called to it, invite your inner child in like every session and just connect with them and see what they need from you today. And everyone always just, they come flying in like, I'm here, and they hold them. And it's so beautiful to watch, because we all have that, just that little girl, little boy inside that we need to, be like, hey, I'm here. I'm your parent,
Yeah.
That's where it stands
Little
for.
me is like if someone were to say to me, okay, you have 1 hour to do therapy with someone, and this is the only hour of therapy that they're going to get in their whole life. Like, crunch it down. What's the good shit? What's the nugget of like, what's the most important stuff people need to know, or the work that they need to focus on or whatever? Hands down, inner child, for sure. Yeah. Like that's where all the meat is. That's where all the sadness, the suffering, all the pain, it comes down to that little person. And I think when I first learned the term inner child, I was like, that's new agey, weird woo woo.
Yeah, it's so true. Everyone thinks that.
Yeah.
Like whatever.
Everyone just thinks it's like, I don't know, like hippie or just woo woo. Yeah. I think is what everyone thinks. It's just dumb. And when I did it in my own therapy, that's where I think it shifted for me, was going, oh, like little Heidi is where all the pain is. Little Heidi is where I need to turn when I feel triggered or sad or anxious or whatever. It's her. Oh, and then when I started to have that awareness in my own therapy, in my own life, that's when I went, oh, wow. Okay. So everything else that we like teach in therapy and stuff is coping, basically. Yeah. It's not healing, right? Like, so CBT and ACT and DBT, all that stuff is a lot of coping. It's not healing. And that's the difference, right? So I think you do inner child stuff and you start having conversations like with and dialoguing with that little person, that's when you start to heal. And then that's rad, because when you heal, then you're done. Like, it's not, because again, coping is just sort of ongoing, right? Like the analogy I always use, I'm a big analogy lover, is like, if you come and see me for therapy every week and you're like, or like if I was a doctor and you go, oh, Heidi, I have this splinter in my foot. Can you help me take it out? Sure. Come in, tweezers, I'll take it out, bandage it up, off you go. Next week you come back and you're like, Heidi, I have another splinter in my foot. Okay, let's take it out. That to me is what traditional talk therapy is you just go every week with your splinters and you take them out.
Yeah.
That's to me as if you're not doing the inner child stuff and we're just sort of doing problem solving and cognitive beliefs and, monitoring my thoughts and that kind of crap. Whereas if you come every week and you keep saying the splinter, at some point I'm going to go to you, what kind of deck or flooring do you have at home?
Yes.
Like, what's the wood, dude? Like,
Yeah,
we could do shoes. We could do socks. You could, again, cope and we could have some techniques and stuff that we do. But ultimately, don't we want to just fix the freaking floor and just get it sanded and
the root cause,
right? Because otherwise you're going to keep spending money coming to see me and all the other ways that you're trying to cope. Whereas if you just come and we get the floor sorted, then you heal. And also I want to teach you, I know how to sand. I know how to lacquer the floor. I know how to do all of that. But what's the point of you coming? I'll teach you.
Mm-hmm.
You know how to fix the floor. So if you move houses, you can fix the floor yourself. You don't need me to do it. And that's the beauty of doing inner child work is that you heal that part of yourself and then you know how to do it. So then tomorrow, because it will always happen where you get triggered or something comes up, you know what to do and you don't feel so helpless because you have the skills and the understanding and the awareness of how to do it and how to process it. So yeah, inner child, dude, that's everything.
Yeah, it changed my whole healing journey, if you like, the whole thing. But while we're talking about inner child, I just want to finish up talking about, I am obsessed, even though I'm not a parent, but I am a kid. I was a kid with all your parenting advice that you put out on Instagram. I was like to Tom, we will be straight to Heidi if we have kids, because it looks so helpful. The stuff you put out, especially I love that you put the meditations, like the insight timer for kids, like getting them meditating. So with parents, what's the kind of common things that they would come to you in terms of, is it with kids' emotions, anxiety? Like what's the kind of, what do you deal with when it comes to that kind of parent-child relationship?
So the reason why I started to get into parenting stuff, and I just wanted to clarify, I'm not a parenting expert because people will often say, like when they introduce me in public speaking, they'll be like parenting expert. And I'm like, I cringe and die inside because I'm not a parenting expert at all. I'm a trauma specialist with an interest in parenting.
Yeah.
Because I started to see in my adult clients so many wounds and problems that were laid down in their childhood that I'm like, oh, this isn't really where I should be focusing my time. When you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, I should actually be going backwards and getting into your parents. Because if I can get into parents' heads when kids are little, then they come through childhood less traumatized.
Love it.
So I started to see this connection of this intersection between trauma, shame, and parenting. And when I saw that connection of the three of those things, that the intersection where they all meet, I was like, oh, I need to do something with this. I need to tell everyone this is really important. Like, oh my God, don't parent that way because you're traumatizing them and you don't realize it. Yep. Or they could be being traumatized, like abused or something, and they're not going to come to you about it because you shame them so often in your parenting style. So I started to see I had greater impact or ways that I could help people more through teaching prevention rather than response and responding to it's like with physical stuff. Like if you go to your physio and you say like, oh, my back or my neck, they can give you exercises and stuff, but what they'll rather do is teach you how to strengthen those parts of your body so you don't get injured in the first place, right? Yeah. Prevention is always key, right? So the key things of when parents come to me with issues with their kids is the same thing that adults come to me. Our two greatest fears, am I enough and am I lovable? That's what all of us wonder. So you take my 10-year-old client and my 60-year-old client, and at their core, their two greatest problems that we all have is some variation of, am I smart enough, pretty enough, skinny enough, rich enough, good enough, one, and am I lovable? Because I'm not sure if that bucket of stuff makes me lovable. Because at this weight, at this income, at this house, at whatever, does that make me lovable? I don't think it does. Or I'm not sure. Or the ways that the people around me treat me make me think I'm not lovable. because of those things or in spite of those things or whatever. When you add those two things, I call them the buckets. So it's the am I enough bucket and the am I lovable bucket. Those two buckets, if they're full, then I feel okay. And I feel high self-esteem, high confidence. I feel good about myself. I am okay. I am enough. I have worth and value. If those two buckets are not filled, I don't feel like I'm okay. And I don't feel like I'm enough. And then I go to therapy, or I have other issues, drug, alcohol, gambling. I have other issues in my life because those two buckets aren't filled. And the biggest mistake that parents make is the ways in which they fill those buckets. Most parents fill those buckets by saying verbally, oh, you're an amazing artist. Oh, you're pretty. Oh, you're so good at soccer, or you're so good at whatever. And they do the verbal, I call it verbal cuddles. So they give lots of verbal cuddles, and then they don't understand why their kids have low self-esteem, low confidence, and same with adults, why they have low self-esteem and low confidence. And why are there so many of us that don't feel like we're good enough and don't feel like we have worth and value, or that we need to hustle for our worthiness? Why are so many of us like that? Because when you zoom back to ages 0 to 10 or 0 to 15, unfortunately, the ways that our parents were communicating, the ways that you are enough and the ways that you're lovable, was backwards. They were doing it verbally. What we want to do instead is three key things. So these are the three things I talk about constantly with parents in the parenting program, in parenting training sessions, and Q&A calls twice a week. In all the ways that I work with parents, this is the stuff that literally comes up constantly, which is the better way you fill the buckets is not through verbal cuddles. It's through choice, constantly giving your kids choice, promoting autonomy and encouraging them to be autonomous in their own lives, and three, connection. And what connection means is really validation and empathizing with their feelings. But the choice thing is probably one of the hardest bits for parents to get, because they think, I'm the parent and you're the child.
Yes.
What they don't realize is by giving a child the choice when they're little, it looks like, do you want the red cup or the blue cup? So simple, but that small moment communicates in a deeper core level, your opinion matters. You are enough. You have so much worth and value in this home that deciding something as little as, do you want the red cup or the blue cup, matters and is important to me.
Wow.
And that's what parents don't get, is they think, screw you, because this is how most of us were raised. Red cup, blue cup. I'm deciding. I'm the adult. You're getting the red cup. No, I want the blue cup. Doesn't matter. I'm saying you're having the red cup. That creates disconnection. And that sort of path work that most parents get on that path when their kids are little then leads to adolescents that are very disconnected from their parents. They need their parents. They need their advice. They need their guidance, but they're so disconnected because from 0 to 10, their parents are constantly encouraging them to believe you have no choice. You have no say. I'm deciding. And why would you want, like, because you don't really have any control over your kids. You just have influence.
Yeah.
And parents like to think that they have control. They have no control. It's influence. And if you don't know that, you'll know that when your kids become teenagers, and then they will show you, you have no control over me.
Oh yeah. I was that teenager.
Yeah.
I was
most of us.
I was horrendous. I was like, looking back now, I was like, I'm probably going to have a child that's going to be like, I'm going to be, I'm going to show you how you're treated. And
children are our greatest teachers.
Yeah. I was an awful, awful teenager. But does that kind of roll into love languages as well as adults? Like, does that reflect, have you, like the Gottsman Institute talk about love languages? Would you say that kind of rolls into that as what you need as adults from relationships and partners?
A lot of times the love language that you will identify with and prefer comes from an unmet childhood need. So oftentimes the way that you like to receive love is maybe the way that you didn't get it as a kid.
Yeah.
Not always. Or it's the way that you got it as a kid. So for those that don't know the 5 love languages, the 5 love languages are physical touch, acts of service, gifts, quality time, and words of affirmation. And so those are the ways that you like to show people you love them or like to feel loved. So oftentimes, and this is a really great point you bring up though for parent-child dynamics, is a lot of parents get really frustrated when their kid doesn't say like physical touch. And they'll feel really hurt or rejected that my son doesn't like to give me hugs, or my daughter doesn't like to open up and tell me what's going on. And I always will pose the 5 love languages. And Gary Chapman is the author, if anyone wants to read the book and learn more about this. Is just because, I show you love by vacuuming, or I show you love by buying you, a purse. I'm thinking I'm showing you love if gifts is my love language. But if your love language is quality time, you're like, dude, a purse and vacuuming, like that doesn't show me love. Like I don't feel loved by you. And that's one of the biggest things that I work through with adult clients, is to look back on their childhood and go, my parents loved me. It just maybe wasn't in the way that I needed or in the way that I wanted, but they loved me. I know that they loved me in their own way. And so that is, again, the kind of going back to the prevention thing, that if we can get parents when their kids are like in primary school to be thinking about, what's my kid's love language? Can I meet that? Can I sort of speak to them in their love language? Okay. So if quality time is their love language, can I try to find 10 minutes a day, minimum, that I spend some time, one-on-one time with them, where we're not doing stuff, but it's really is like giving kids the ultimate, I think, if we're saying about the parenting, kind of how this all connects, is if parents can be communicating to their children that they are enough, have worth, have value, are lovable just as they are, by encouraging choice. And this is choice around like everything, like what do you want to wear? And it's not what do you want to wear? It's do you want this shirt or this shirt? Do you want to come inside in 5 minutes or 10 minutes? Of course, they're going to say 10 minutes, but that's not the point. The point is to communicate your opinion matters. And I give a shit what you think. And when you do that from a really little age, then when they get to be adolescents, they know that you care what they think, and they know that they matter. And then they're more willing to listen to you and take your advice and take your guidance, because you've said to them kind of all along what you think matters. We may not necessarily be able to have lollies for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but I love that that's what you want to do. Like I can validate that that's your experience, and that's important to you. Well, let's work through how this is going to impact our teeth, or let's work through, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I love that. I think so many people listening are going to be like, yes, like I just needed to hear that, just that little golden nugget of advice. So Heidi, thank you so much for all your amazing words of wisdom. And, I feel like this is such an educational podcast. I'm so excited to share it with my community. So where can people find you in terms of, I honestly think a lot of people are going to want to try the EMDR, and parents are going to want to have a chat. So where can they reach you and find your work?
So HeidiRogers.com.au is my main website, that has links to, there's a lot of free resources that I have on the resources section, or I think it's called freebies on the website, where there's different webinars or handouts or worksheets that you can get stuff for free. And then if you want to dive even more and you want to transform your parenting, I have a parenting program, which is an online course that you can do. And there's just basically webinars and videos teaching you all of this stuff, because I found I was saying the same things over and over again in sessions with parents. And then I was like, this is not efficient. I should put it into a course. So I made the videos so that people can learn in their own time. It's easier for parents with busy schedules. And parents will say that they sort of listen to the course as like a podcast as they're doing stuff. They listen to it that way. But yeah, it's basically, I kind of created a 10-week kind of program to not traumatize your kids, or all the stuff that I wish parents knew, so that when their kids are, in their 20s or 30s, the amount of trauma that they have is much more minimized and is as small as we can get it. So that if you kind of get on the front foot with your parenting now, you don't have to deal with bigger stuff, I guess, later. So so the parenting program, I have a monthly membership thing too. If people prefer the monthly kind of thing of trainings and Q&As, and if they prefer to learn in a group setting, there's a whole bunch of different ways that people can work with me. But if they just go to my website, that's a great place to start.
Amazing. And on Instagram, you're Heidi Rogers, because I love your little videos. I'm like, oh, cute. Like I just watch them, even though I'm not a parent, but they're really good, the information you put out. So Yay, thank you so much. We will definitely do this again because there's so much more that we could talk about. Yeah, and hopefully for anyone listening, you know, if Heidi resonates, please do reach out to her if you have any questions. I'm sure she'd be happy to answer them.
Yeah. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Heidi.